All right, so this is my project of the brain, and I'll go ahead and start by talking about the lobes. Number one is the frontal lobe right here, which is everything in the pink, and I'll go ahead and outline it in here. And the frontal lobe really is about motor control. So what I think about, how I remember this is when I go to the gym, I'm really using and thinking about all of the muscles that I am working with. So again, its main function is motor control. Other functions that it also pertains with is emotional regulation, such as when you're feeling sad, or cognitive processes, and as well as social interactions. Number two is the parietal lobe right here in the purple. I'll go ahead and outline that as well. And really the parietal lobe, the way I think about it is when you fall, then you feel pain. And so this one has to do with sensory information that involves touch or pain. Number three is the occipital lobe right here in the back. And it is represented by all these zigzag lines. So I'll go ahead and outline it as well. And the occipital lobe, the way I think about it is an eye. So it has to do with visual processing. Number four is the temporal lobe, which is in baby pink color, and I'll go ahead and outline it as well. So all of this is part of the temporal lobe. And what I picture when I'm talking about the temporal lobe is really the ear, which involves auditory processing. What is interesting about the temporal lobe is that it also houses the hippocampus, which helps us with memory and learning. Number five is the cerebellum right here. I'll go ahead and outline it as well. It's all of this, and I represented it using the black lines. And the cerebellum's main function is voluntary movement, but it helps us with balancing and posture. So the way I think about the cerebellum is I think about the Princess Belle. When she's dancing, she's definitely making sure that she is using correct posture and also balancing. Number six, it's in lime green. It's the brain stem right here. And I'll go ahead and outline it as well. It's the very bottom portion of the brain. And the brain stem, really, it helps us with breathing, blood pressure, and even our heart rate. I like to think about this as an Apple Watch because an Apple Watch helps us get our heart rate as well. So that's how I help memorize it. It is also a pathway for nerve impulses to be going back and forth between the brain and the rest of the body as well. Number seven, it is the Broca's area, which is right here. It's one of my favorites because it has to do with language. People also say that it looks like the letter M as well. And number seven involves language and speech production. So being able to use our articulators here around our mouth and inside our mouth to be able to produce speech. Number eight, which is my other favorite one, is the Wernicke's area, which lives in the temporal lobe. I forgot to mention that number seven, the Broca's area, lives in the frontal lobe. But number eight, the Wernicke's area, lives in the temporal lobe. And the Wernicke's area has to do with language comprehension. So in order for us to understand written or spoken language and being able to comprehend it before it goes to the Broca's area, which is now being able to use our speech. And now we're going to move on to number 9, which is the cerebral longitudinal fissure, very long name. And I used this little black dotted line to represent it, which starts from the frontal area and it ends all the way to the occipital lobe, And this one, its main function is to divide the hemispheres of the brain, the left to the right hemisphere. It does that because it helps with functional specialization between the two hemispheres, where the left hemisphere is more about the language and critical thinking, whereas the right hemisphere is more for spatial reasoning and creativity as well. Fissure, I just wanted to name, fissure also can mean like a sulcus, which is a very deep, really deep groove that helps separate parts of the brain. In this case, it's the right to the left hemisphere. And now we're gonna move on to number 10, which is this time is a lateral fissure. So, which is number 10. And I also represented this fissure with a dotted sparkly gems. So number 10, as you notice, it's a little bit more horizontal, and it helps separate the temporal lobe from the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. Its main function is just that. It's to help separate them. It is also a groove. As you notice, it's a fissure, and it is involved with auditory perception and also information processing because of where it's located between all these three lobes. And it is very related to the auditory processing as well due to the temporal lobe. Number 11 is the central sulcus, which is right here, right in the middle, this pink line right here going up and down. Notice that this word has sulcus, sulcus can also mean a grove. So it's a really deep grove that goes in here, and it separates the frontal lobe with the parietal lobe. And going more detailed, it actually separates the primary motor cortex with the somatosensory cortex, which is right here represented with 12 and 13. So it's right in the middle of those two. Let me put it a little close. So right here, this is the sulcus, and it separates that. And its primary function is just to create a boundary between those two cortices, and it's involved with information processing of having sensory feedback to be able to produce motor commands as well. The next one is number 12, which is the precentral gyrus. So it's right here in front of the central sulcus. And number 12, the precentral gyrus also has a different name, which is the primary motor cortex. Everything that is involved with muscle movements, and it's the primary point of activation for motor movements. One thing I want to mention is that in its name, it has the word gyrus, which is, you can think of it as a bump as well. So it curves up. So anytime I mention gyrus, which I believe all the rest of the terms have gyrus, so I'm gonna be talking about a bump that goes that's within our brain. So again, number 12, the precentral gyrus has to do everything with motor movements, muscle movements. Number 13 is now the postcentral gyrus, which another name is the somatosensory cortex. So it's a primary reception for somatic sensations. So anything that involves pain, touch, temperature, and even pressure as well. This one is part of the parietal lobe. And something I forgot to mention is that the precentral gyrus is part of the frontal lobe. So that's another way we can differentiate those two. And so now we move on to number 14, which is the angular gyrus right here at the very end part of the parietal lobe. This is number 14, the angular gyrus. Again, gyrus means that it's a bump in that part of the brain, and its main function is language processing for the meaning of words. How I remember this, I think about story time during bedtime, is that I am reading books to my children. So I am trying to understand the reading language while I am reading books to my children. Two other functions for the angular gyrus is memory retrieval as well as spatial cognition. So knowing how to navigate and where you are. Number 15 is the hesial gyrus right here, which lives in the temporal lobe as well. And number 15, I really think about the ear because it is the primary receptive area for auditory. It also has a different name, and it's the transverse temporal gyrus because it goes up and down, and it helps really with early sound processing, such as stress and intonation of sounds. Number 16, 17, and 18 are part also of the temporal lobe. Number 16 is the superior temporal gyrus. Number 17 is the middle temporal gyrus, and number 18 is the inferior temporal gyrus. So all of these are bumps, 3 big bumps that live in the temporal lobe. What's interesting to know is that all these 3 have a little bit of different functions as well, which I thought was very interesting. Number 16 is helps with processing auditory information because, again, it houses 15, which is the Hirsch's gyrus, and it also has number 8, which is the Wernicke's area. So these 2, as I mentioned, has to do with language processing, and 15 in particular, it helps with understanding the written language. It helps with understanding early sound processing, such as phonemes as well. So when we think about the superior temporal gyrus, I'm also thinking about the language processing and knowing that it helps us identify phonemes, syllables, and even intonation or stresses of sounds. And I also wanted to mention that it houses the primary auditory cortex, and that primary auditory cortex lives in the Hirsch's gyrus, which is here, number 15. Now for number 17, which is the middle temporal gyrus, it also has to do with language processing, but more into depth, it has to do with the meaning of words and phrases and how they relate to each other. And number 18, which I feel is very different, has to do with visual recognition. So here I think about family and friends being able to recognize their faces and knowing who they are. And it also helps making mental images as well.